While this is going up, one of the questions was asked about the contracting, and it is hoped that maybe as early as your March 4th meeting, we'll have a memorandum of agreement or understanding with the county. I haven't seen the updated MOU yet, but there is one that's in the works. Essentially, the way the model would work right now for construction is that the county would hold the construction contract and would pay all the construction bills. I'm generalizing a bit, but that's how that would work. And then, of course, we're looking at putting out special obligation bonds for this. The county, again, likely through an MOU, would get those proceeds to pay the entire construction project, and then we would get stuck with paying. I say stuck. We would end up paying the actual debt on that. So we would be holding that debt. The county wouldn't be holding that debt, but the county would be responsible for handling all the construction. So the way it would work would be very similar to any kind of department of the town with a bill. A bill would come in. The department signs off on it. In this case, the department would be the town and the contractor. The project manager would sign off on that, and then it would go to the county for payment. So that's the way it would work. It would never really come through us, but we would end up with the debt for the special obligation bonds. So, and I'm going to get into that now.
You're saying that we will give the county all of the money we get from the bonds?
I don't think "give" is the term I would use, but yeah, no. My understanding is that what'll likely to happen, we won't get that money and then transfer it to them. We'll probably, through the process, it'll just go straight to them. It'll still be our debt, but it'll go to them. They'll hold it in their project fund, which will be along with the occupancy tax proceeds, and that's where all the payments for the project will come from.
Under on the cost of the project, basically the county would reap that in the occupancy, what they use of occupancy tax to pay it.
Yes. Right. So the way the agreement for the money has been for the occupancy tax money has been. What we've already agreed to previously is that the county is saying that they will give us $7.7 million. If the project comes under that, we will already be up with the LGC. Our bonds will already be issued. So the savings will come from the occupancy tax, not from our portion of it. So yes. So in what the county will argue, and there's no reason not to believe them at this point. But so any savings will go back into the fund that will be then used for our future projects. So when we get to renourishment, I know everyone gets concerned about renourishment with the MSDs, but when you get to renourishment, hopefully there'll be money in that occupancy tax, or for future projects, there'll be money in that occupancy tax that we can use to pay for those projects. So
we have a flat cost.
Our cost is fixed.
It's fixed unless we go over.
Unless we go over, and then it's more. So we have to pay the difference.
Yes. Yeah.
With that said, I think Ken has done a good job, and Carter and Associates have done a good job, I think, of giving us a very conservative cost estimate at this point. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about that when we get there. So what I'm talking about is the whole funding side of this. On March 4th, we have a public hearing on the MSDs. There'll be two things that the council can do at that meeting. Well, three things, four things if you want to divide it up into all its unique parts, probably 5 or 6. But what the council can do at that meeting, once the public hearing is held, you could adopt the MSDs as is. You could adopt the MSDs and the rates as is. You could do neither, and we could do it at a future date, or we could throw the whole thing up in the air and come out with something else. I don't think that's what we'll do. My guess is that at the very least, once the public hearing is completed, that the council will seriously, at that point, consider a resolution that would then establish the MSDs and most likely the rates. But that'll be a decision you'll make after the public hearing on the 4th. Just as way of background, what you've got is my presentation. I'm sure you all will look at it and take lots of notes and have fun with it. That's what the purpose of it is. There's also a copy of the notice that went out to all the property owners and in the newspaper, and a copy of the report that was generated. So anyone who's in the MSD area should already have received these things. If you didn't, it's likely because there was some screw up with the U.S. Post Office. We did mail out 930. Not the local post office. Not the local post office, the Kitty Hawk post office, or your other local post office.
I would caution you, Chris, that from what I saw, if people didn't get them, it's because there was an address problem.
Yeah, which is amazing because we sometimes wonder how people get their tax bills, but that's a discussion for another time. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we got here. I'm going to do an overview of the proposed MSDs, and then we'll talk a little bit about the public hearing. So how do we get here? Just background. Ken brought us up to where we're at this moment. Of course, what we did was back way in May of 2013, Ken completed his shoreline or erosion and shoreline management feasibility study. This recommended that the best way to deal with the hotspot area north of the pier was an offshore dredge project. This was segment 7 and 8, which included basically from the FRF property north to Martin Lane and Sanderling. We contracted with CP&E to do permitting and engineering for the project. Once that engineering was done and we had essentially more profiles, more data to work with, we adjusted the northern end of the project area so that it would end at just north of Oystercatcher Lane, which is 140 skimmer, and council approved that project area on November 5th of this past year. Why did we do that? Well, this is segment 8 right here. You can see the line. The greenhouse is, I believe, is 144. Then the next house is, the greenhouse is 142, and then the house next to it is 140, I believe. And so what we ended up doing was taking it to where we felt like we could justify the last impacted house in the models, and we feel very comfortable with that, and that's where we drew that line. That's not where the taper ends, that's where the taper would begin, which ends up giving us a project area right here that looks like this. So it starts at 137 Spindrift Lane, goes down the ocean to 140 Skimmer Lane. Then it goes from 1308 Duck Road and goes down to 1456 Duck Road, and then everything in between there is the project area. And so that project area is where the municipal service districts will be located, or are proposed to be located. Again, the project area, Ken already showed you this. The main fill area is 7,980 feet, and then so that's from 137 Spindrift to 140 Skimmer, and then there's a 500-foot taper on each side. The 500-foot taper on the southern end is still up in the air because of the core, but this is what the fill area would look like. This brings us down to the cost. So these are the costs of all of the town's projects. These are the best numbers we have at this point. These numbers likely won't change until we actually go through the bidding process. So these are the best numbers that we have at this point. Just to walk you through it, duct $750,000 in permitting costs. You add that to the $13,839,000 in construction costs, and it gives us a total project cost of $14,589,000. The county's going to provide $7.7 million of that, and then the remainder, $6.889 million, is what we'll have to debt out as special obligation bonds. Special obligation bonds are revenue sources that we pledge a revenue source that we don't levy. So what we are pledging as a part of that, and you remember the word pledge, what we're pledging are occupancy revenues, sales tax revenues, and land transfer tax revenues. We don't levy those taxes. Now, from a practical standpoint, so what that means is once we enter into the agreement with banks, if we were to default somehow, they could come in and take those revenue sources from us to pay our debt. That ain't going to happen, but theoretically they could do that. Now, they don't care actually how we pay for it, and so the way we're going to pay for it is or at least partially pay for it, is through the establishment of municipal service districts. Any questions before I move on from that? So this is what our debt structure would look like, okay? The special obligation bonds, I've had people ask, well, why don't you pull those out for 30 years? Well, we're not going to get permission from the local government commission to debt out a 5-year project for 30 years. So we're really tied into 5 years on this, and so that's what we'll be looking to do. So you can see this model is based on a 3.5% interest rate. That is considered to be high for this project. So that's, again, these numbers are conservative. Ken's numbers are conservative. The actual cost of the debt itself is conservative. So I will eat my words if I have to, and I'll eat them right here in front of everyone, but I think it's safe to keep this as sort of a worst-case scenario at this point. Of course, we're not going to really benefit from any savings, at least up front in the first year. But this is what the model is. So principal, 1.377,800. Interest, you see it's declining interest. The declining interest is how the LGC will make us do it. We fixed principal which would result in declining interest. So you see our debt service numbers per year. The way the formula works with the county is that our contribution is fixed. So our contribution is based on the Nags Head model. Originally, all 3 towns are based on that, but after a few discussions, we're sort of the only ones left following the Nags Head model, which was the equivalent of 7.82 cents. So the equivalent of 7.82 cents for us is 1.221390. So 1.221 million. The county will then come in, this is what is in red, and the county comes in and makes up the difference. So, you can look at it as them kind of paying interest and a little bit more, but they're providing money to sort of hold our numbers fixed so that we can plan around them. So when it comes to what we're trying to pay for through the MSDs, it's this 1.221 million. 5-year period. The question is always asked, okay, once the MSDs are established, or once the MSDs are in place, regardless of how we end up paying for it, at the end of that 5-year period, what happens? Well, the answer to that is we don't know. But what could happen are several things. One is we could immediately be looking at renourishment, and there may be enough money in the Dare County Occupancy Tax Fund that comes back to us meaning duck, that would cover those costs, in which case we could we could get rid of the MSD for that year and not have an additional tax in those areas. What I think is probably most likely is a different scenario, which is that there will be some money from the occupancy tax, and the actual rate that's charged in the MSD will go down significantly to pay for the project, but there will still be an MSD. There will still be MSDs in place. There's also the chance that at the end of that 5-year period, the project may be performing so well that we don't need to do renourishment yet, and so we don't need to collect any money, and so we're not collecting any money, so we keep the MSDs in place, but we have a 0 rate attached to them. So those are all things that will happen as we get closer to that 5-year period. There'll be continued monitoring, so we'll know what we're doing. There'll be continued discussions with the county. So, you know, we'll be just talking about this long before we get to that point about where we're likely to go. One thing to remember with renourishment of a nourishment project, renourishment of renourishment, however you want to say it, is that it's probably about a third of the cost of the original project. So depending on how many storms and what kind of shape it is at the end of that 5-year period. So,
Chris?
Yes?
Excuse me, if the bidding comes in lower on the project, does that alter the amount we go for in bonds?
No.
Yes, because, so what will happen, we'll bid it out, we'll have everything prepared to go to the LGC. We have to get local government, for those of you who aren't familiar, the LGC is the local government commission. We have to get permission from the local government commission, which is a bit anachronistic in my opinion, but we have to get permission from the local government commission to issue any debt over $500,000 or for a term of more than 5 years. So we have to go to the LGC. So what we'll do is we'll have the package, we'll get the bids in. Once we get the bids in, then we can go to the local government commission and issue that debt. So if they come in, yes, the amount of debt we issue will be tied to the actual bids.
Good.
Again, not to get too far ahead of myself, but one of the things the council will have to grapple with is that we won't have those bids till probably close to this time next year. That's the way the schedule is looking. We want to put the MSDs in place and have that money starting so we can pay our debt. So what may happen is, and what I would recommend is that we use these estimates that we have, we go ahead and put the rates in place. If the bids come in significantly less and we don't need that amount of revenue, then we could come through and next year we could change the rate of the MSDs to lower it to make everyone equal. So, but we won't know that until this time next year. The MSDs would go into effect before July 1st of this year for the July 1st tax year. So again, why are we doing this? You know, I've simplified this into these items: erosion protection, storm protection, enhanced recreational beach, maintenance of the tax base, and maintenance of the reputation of the beaches. I think those are all very valid reasons. We've been over this at length, and I think that pretty much summarizes it. So who benefits from it? Well, I would argue that oceanfront property owners benefit from the whole gamut. Erosion, storm, enhanced recreational beach, maintenance of the tax base, and maintenance of the reputation of the beaches. Non-oceanfront property owners benefit from enhanced recreational beach, maintenance of the tax base, maintenance of reputation of the beaches, and the entire town benefits from maintenance of the tax base and maintenance of the reputation of the beaches. Where am I going with this and why have I laid it out this way is because the final model that the council approved essentially sort of followed this and said that because oceanfront property owners benefit from all five, they should pay more per property for the benefits from that project. Non-oceanfront should pay less, and then the entire town should pay a little bit less because they're still getting benefits, but they're not getting some of those direct benefits that the others in the project area are. The council looked at a variety of scenarios. I'm not going to go through all those, but essentially 9 scenarios. These are what I called them: the 0-50-50 project, the 33-33-33, not project but scenario, the 0-100-0, the 50-50-0, which is essentially the Nag's Head model, the 37, oh, I'm sorry, that's the Kill Devil Hills model, the 37-63-0 model, which is essentially the Nag's Head model, the 40-30-30 model, the 30-35-35 model, the 20-40-40 model, and the 30-40-30 model. So what those all are, the first number is the town, so what the town would pay. The second number is what oceanfront would pay of total project cost, or in this case, what our debt service costs, and 50 is what non-oceanfront. So the models that actual scenarios and big long sheets that showed actual impacts on the general fund were developed for were a model that the entire town paid nothing and the debt service costs were split equally between oceanfront and non-oceanfront properties. The 33-33-33 model was every town would pay a third, oceanfront would pay a third, and the non-oceanfront would pay a third. The 50-50-0 model was the town would pay a third and oceanfront would pay a third. Non-oceanfront wouldn't pay anything additional. And then there was the 20-40-40 model where the entire town would pay 20% of the debt service. The oceanfront would pay 40% of the debt service, and non-oceanfront would be 40% of the debt service. The council selected as its preferred alternative the 20-40-40 plan. So under that model, of the $1.221,390 that the town has to pay, the entire town each year for 5 years, the entire town would pay $244,278 of that. That's equivalent to about 1.6 cents on our real estate tax. If you were to average that out to all the towns, it's just an average, obviously varies on how expensive your house is, that 89 bucks. Oceanfront would pay $488,556. That's a rate of 46.3 additional cents. And the average per parcel for oceanfront would be just under $5,000 per year for 5 years. Non-oceanfront, what we would need to get under this plan would be $488,556, which is the equivalent of 14.8 cents. For non-oceanfront, which is an additional tax of an average of $705 per year. I tried to bring some real-world numbers to this. So I somewhat randomly, picked properties. So under the oceanfront, so a house in Skimmer Way that was valued at $1,200,800 per year would pay a tax of $5,560. Over the 5-year period, that would be $27,799. Ocean Bay Boulevard, right around $1 million. The additional tax would be right around our average of $4,869. A house on Mallard Drive, an oceanfront house on Mallard Drive, valued at $649,800, would pay an additional tax of $3,009 for a total of $15,000 over that 5-year period. Bufflehead Road, 1.6, would pay an additional tax of $7,445 during the 5-year period each year. And a house on Spindrift Lane, valued at $885,000, would pay about $4,100 for the 5-year period. Non-oceanfront properties, a house on Duck Road, and yes, these MSDs go all the way to Duck Road. A house valued at $972,000 would pay an additional tax per year of $1,439. A house on Wood Duck Drive valued at $477,000 would pay an additional tax of $706. A house on Diane Street valued at $533 would pay an additional tax of $790 per year. House on Carroll Drive valued at $355,500 would pay an additional tax of $526 per year. And a house on Skimmer Way valued at $875,000 would pay an additional tax of $1,296 per year for 5 years. So, getting into the municipal service districts themselves and sort of what we can expect on March 4th. So we've scheduled the proposed public hearing on the proposed MSDs for March 4th. The notice has been sent as required by general statutes and certified. One of the things you have to do is certify that the list you're using for the mailings to all potentially impacted property owners comes from the most, how do I say this eloquently, from the most recent tax list as of January 1st. So we did ours from the January 1st, 2015 tax list, which is the most recent for us, and that's where we pulled our list for our notices from. We did send out about 930 notices to potentially impacted property owners, and feel like we've met the statute that way. The report, which everyone now should have a copy of, and which is available online, about the MSD and which is required to be prepared by general statutes, did go with that mailing and is available at the office and online. So the public hearing is on the proposed MSD and MSDB. I'm going to go over those in just a second, which the council approved on November 20th, or on November 5th, I'm sorry, and also follows the 2040-40 plan. So that's what the public hearing ostensibly is on. After the public hearing, the council can adopt a resolution that would establish it in the rate, or can continue to work with it. It depends on what you hear and how you want to proceed. The rates established by the MSDs would go into effect as of July 1st. It's essentially handled the same as your regular tax bill. The only difference is that it'll be broken out, but it'll follow the same payment schedule. So theoretically, even though the bill is due, once it goes out, you have kind of a grace period until January 1st. So, those are the basics of what we're going to, of the MSDs themselves. So, once again, this is the project area, which goes from 137 Spindrift to 140 Skimmer, and then also goes from 1456 Duck Road, 1308 Duck Road to 1456 Duck Road, and then you can see in this area, it includes properties on Oyster Catcher from 100 to 112 Oyster Catcher Lane. It pulls those items up, those properties into the MSD. So this is MSD-A. MSD-A incorporates everything from ocean to sound, and what that would be is 14.8 cents is what this MSD would be. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, Oceanfront's paying the equivalent of 46.3 cents. Well, that's because we then come back and put an additional MSD in place that's only oceanfront, which is roughly 31. I have it in this next graphic, but makes up the difference so that it's equivalent of 46.3 cents. So under the 2040-40 plan, MSD-A, oceanfront and non-oceanfront, everyone pays 14.8 cents. And then an additional MSD is in place, which would be MSD-B, which is oceanfront only, which is 31.5 cents additional, which brings the total MSD tax to 46.3 cents for oceanfront, and then non-oceanfront is 14.8 cents. Little confusing. You can blame Robert for that because he made us set it up that way. And that's what I have. On the 4th, on March 4th, I'm planning on doing essentially the same presentation, maybe with a few updated graphics, so that people know exactly what we're talking about and what the public hearing is on. In spite of my best efforts, my mailing and my report did apparently confuse some people. So I'm going to try to make sure everyone's on the same page when we start, and so that we're all talking about the same things. I'm glad to answer any questions that I can answer from the council or the audience.
Chris, you may want to point out that 20% town share is not going to result in a tax increase, but coming from the general fund?
Yes. So what Don just said. The 1.6 cents is not a tax increase. In those scenarios, we went through and we determined that we felt we could afford, without a tax increase, contributing 1.6 cents of the town's general fund revenues for the project, and still meet our other needs. Of course, that was before Donna started working on things, but I think we can still make it work even with that.
Can I ask a question? Was it my understanding that originally the tax was raised very slightly in order to pay for the permitting and some of the engineering, and then that is still left in place?
That's correct. So 2 years ago, she asked about essentially about the tax. Basically, you're asking about the tax increase that the council adopted a couple years ago. That was 3.66 cents. We did that during the revaluation, and so it was an equivalent of, once you got through the whole revenue neutral rate, is the equivalent of 3.66 cents. A portion of that was to pay for engineering and permitting, and then also for sand fencing. For beach planting and fertilization and those projects. So essentially what we're doing is continuing to use the money that we're no longer going to need for the permitting and the engineering, and using that as a direct subsidy for that 20%.
The reason I brought this up is I've had people say to me, it isn't fair that the whole town isn't getting their taxes raised to pay for this. And I've tried to explain to them, but I wasn't sure if I was explaining it correctly, that there was a portion of our taxes that had already been put towards this project, and that's staying in place, and therefore we are all the taxpayers are contributing to this. And it might be helpful if you point that out on March 4th, because that you're going to get a lot of people saying, how come everybody isn't having their taxes raised to pay for this? So I'm just suggesting that might be a good argument to use for that question. Sure.
We can certainly make that clear. I think in the print materials that have gone out, I think it's I think we've made the point that the entire town is contributing to this project. So,
James.
Chris, just a suggestion.
Hold on a second.
Chris, just a suggestion. The next time you do the graphics, for the benefit of us old folk in the room, could you make the numbers larger so we can read them?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Hold on, I gotta get a microphone.
I just wanted to correct that. He didn't mean increase the numbers. He meant increase the size.
Glad you pointed that out. I thought it was the latter.
Thank you.
It's always good to clarify things like that, right? So Chris, you had alluded to that this was confusing or had brought up a lot of questions. Like what kind of questions are you getting at this point around this?
So of the 930 mailings that have gone out, I've gotten, I think, 2 emails and 4 calls. Only 1 call was of the variety of, what are you idiots doing? I don't want to pay this. The others were more of the variety, help me understand, you know, I'm in this property, am I oceanfront or non-oceanfront? Am I paying, you know, 14.8 or I'm... 3 of them were of that variety. One of them was, I love beach nourishment, I live on the ocean front, and I think you should look at the numbers again and figure out how else you're going to redistribute who pays for what. So there hasn't been anything overly negative that's come in so far. I'm sort of surprised there aren't more people here today. Maybe we'll have more people on March 4th, or maybe we'll get a variety of emails and other items before that public hearing. I feel like we've done a very good job of getting the word out. I think that anyone who's been following this, and I think a large number of people who are in the impacted area have been following us, and so they know what's going on. In addition to the mailing that went out, we also did the newsletter, which went out to everyone and also had essentially the same information minus the report in it. So again, I think the word's gotten out there. I'm sort of surprised that we haven't gotten more input, negative, not negative, neutral, but I've been surprised at the positive nature with some what I thought were reasonable questions about how this would impact people specifically, and that's really the majority of what I've been getting.
Thank you for this report, and I agree that having larger graphics will help us all, even on the little sheet that we got here.
You know what's interesting? I just got to digress for a second. I'm the only one of anyone who presented who actually followed our policies, because everything I have is 24. Donna did it too, but she was dealing with much larger numbers. Everything that I've done is 24 point, which is what we're told, which is what our guidelines are to do.
You're just a lot younger than some.
So I want to make that clear. I'll put it up to about 54 to make everyone happy. But I'm the one who's done that, so anyway.
Well, go.
Directions.
Yeah.
What's that?
For once you follow directions.
I know it's not my personality to do that, but.
So, you know.
Well, what my question was, and thank you for this presentation. It's really been, I don't think we can hear it enough, so I'm very happy that we put this on the agenda today for people so that they can hear it, maybe see it online, and if they're watching this streaming. What I wanted to make sure I understood on the MSDs going forward, after we get the fact, and thank you, Chuck, for that question about the fact that the contract price may go down. So in that case, right when the MSDs are done, we're going to be working on these basic numbers. But then, as I'm understanding it, within that 5-year financing period, if you will, we may adjust the MSD amount. I mean, I'm not saying we will, but there's room for that. So that's the first thing I think I understood you saying, that we could tweak it if need be, if just so that the numbers work out, if we happen to have overshot what our obligation would be.
Yeah, so and I apologize. I stand corrected. This is not 24.
Thank you. I wasn't going to say anything
because it is a picture of. I didn't want to have to recreate what has already been created. And this was a PDF, so I will stretch it and try to make it much larger next time. So yeah, I mean you're right. Each year, as part of just as each year we have to set our tax rate, we'll also have to set the rate that's in the MSDs. So each year we'll have an opportunity to amend that if we need to. So
okay, great, and then so that's a really excellent point that I didn't, even listening to it sitting here that whole time, I never really caught that. So I'm that's a good thing.
I don't
And then-
necessarily recommend that, but you could do that.
Right, well, so we have this flexibility with the MSD figures, is what we've established year over year, just like we do our tax rate. And then what I'm really trying to ascertain here, and just make sure I'm clear on, is that after the 5-year period, we've paid for it, and what you're saying is, what I believe you said was that we would essentially keep that MSD A open, which is the entire project, perhaps MSD B, depending on where we
I
are
would
in
imagine
5 years. Both. So we keep them open, and that's in perpetuity for basically, I mean, is that really kind of what we're looking at? So that because we may need to go back at some point, I mean, who's overseeing us with these MSDs? Because we've had the finance people.
I mean, you guys are going to be overseeing the MSDs.
Okay, so once they're in place, they don't go away unless we just put out a resolution that says no more MSD A and B? How does that work?
Basically. Each year, we need to reestablish the MSDs and the rates. And so we will do that, and we can expect there to be the 5-year period while we're financing this. I think that it would be misleading to say that the MSDs at some level, at some rate, won't be in place as long as we're looking at maintaining a project.
Okay, and we can do that with what we've established this first time. I was sort of under the false impression that we had to kind of redo this after 5 years with a new, let's say we did a new project, so that MSDs were tied to projects essentially, but I'm wrong about that.
No, I mean, you're not wrong about that. So at the end of the 5-year period, if this project is paid off, then we don't have anything to tie the MSDs to. The MSDs have to be tied to a project. You can't just collect to collect. So now we may have a fund balance at the end of that, which we would have to use in the project area. But as far as collecting taxes, we would have to. I mean, if we're not moving forward with an additional project, then we really can't collect a tax at that point.
Okay, so let's just say, just so I get an example here, 5 years go by, we've paid for our project, obviously, and now things are looking pretty good on the beach, or we see that there's a need for renourishment, but it's going to take about another year or so to go through all the stuff that we go through to do this, because these things take time. So we've got this maybe 1, maybe 2 year lag, but we see it on the horizon. Okay, there's a renourishment is coming to town for that section. So then we just basically know that, talk about it, keep the rate at 0, knowing that what's on the horizon will be, once we get some concrete numbers, we'll tie some numbers and make some decisions at that point. But we keep them there, but we may just not implement them.
Yeah, I mean, and so we may end up, again, it's all going to depend on sort of where we're at the end of this design period. It won't be happening in a vacuum. We won't wake up in year 5 and say, ooh, we need to do this now. But what will likely happen is we get to that period, and we'll probably have a maintenance plan that will be close to, so we'll have an idea. We'll know whether we're going to do it, at the end of the 5th year, the 6th year, or whatever we're going to do it. We'll likely know about that. And similar to this project, we're going to put this tax in place, and then what the requirement is that you have to be under contract for the project that you're collecting the revenue from within a year of establishing the tax rate in that MSD and establishing the MSD. So, in this case, we expect to be under construction in FY 2016. So that's why we feel comfortable levying the tax July 1st, 2015. Similarly, we'll have estimates that we can likely use, so when we get to the end of that 5-year period, we'll be able to make an informed decision about, when we're going to start, how much the cost might be, and how we're going to pay for it. So all those things will be coming into place, and so as we get closer, we'll be making those decisions.
Chris, is the expected or anticipated renourishment efforts considered a new project or part of this part of this one?
That's a permitting question. I think ideally we would want to be allowed to do renourishment as a part of this the permit. I don't think they're going to allow us to do that.
I think we'll try to modify the permit.
Again, this is just because on our recording, it doesn't capture any sound without
Yeah, I think we would try to modify the existing permit. So as far as the agencies, they may look at it as a continuing, excuse me, a continued on project.
Nag's Head's project, as an example, and Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, but Nag's Head's project for renourishment, they're gonna have to get a new permit. Is that correct? Or are they going to be able to just modify?
I'm not real familiar with the process that they propose to start going through.
Point, maybe you can clarify. We have an estimate right now, cost-wise, and a contribution from the county. The member of understanding that we've seen right now says any savings go back to the county. If that bid comes in below, are we going to be able to benefit from that in our special obligation bonds, or is that money going to go back to the Shoreline Commission, back to the county? It's kind of my understanding is, say we save $500,000, we're not going to get to reduce our share, but that's going to go back to the county.
Yeah, that's the way it reads. The project would have to come way under budget for us to reduce our. I think for the county to even consider allowing us to reduce our portion. Essentially, this 7.82 cents is considered our funding in our funding as part of the project. It would have to take a huge cost savings, which isn't likely for us to, I think, be able to negotiate with the county. It's possible, it could happen, but I don't think there's enough wiggle room in the estimates to get us down to where we could lower our MSD rates.
Our obligation is not going to change over those 5 years.
Our obligation.
The obligation of 1.2 plus million.
1.22
Okay.
will not change.
Right.
So what circumstances, if any, would there be leftover money in our beach fund? Would there? Could there? That we would just hold on to for renourishment?
Where a fund balance could possibly be would be if the amount of revenue derived from the increase in shared revenues.
And we would just hold it to be spent only in that capacity in the beach fund?
That revenue would have to be spent within the area for the project where it was generated.
Chris, wouldn't you be able to take that from the year before to reduce the tax rate for the next year?
Theoretically, probably after the first year, that's something we could look at. The first year we won't have that, but after that we possibly could.
So after the first year, you should have an idea of what that delta is.
Yeah, it's possible that
And we should be able to use that delta to our benefit on the tax rate, shouldn't we?
That is possible, yes.
So you could either use it as a tax rate or keep it in the fund for renourishment, just funny to say, down the road.
Right, to reduce any tax
It'll
implication.
be our choice what we did with it.
That's correct. There'll be some options.
Sure.
We have the same problem with the 200,000, don't we?
The 200,000 is different. The 200,000 is a different. The 200,000 is a different entity. The 200,000 was being put in there because we were being advised that we should have 1.25 to 1.4% over what we could generate, what our shared revenue or what we were pledging to get the best rate from the lending institutions. And what we're finding is that our combined shared revenues, what we would pledge, are more than 1.25, more than 1.4% over, and so we don't gain anything from that from a lending standpoint.
So we won't put the money in the first place, huh?
That's something I'm going to talk with the Carters about and see where we go from there.
But if we did and then didn't need it, we could use it
Yes.
as we saw fit, as long as it was for paying for project costs.
That particular money, you wouldn't have to.
Rated by MSD, that could be used for.
John Fricker's got a question?
Yes. On this subject we've been talking about for the last 5 minutes or so, earlier on in your presentation, I thought I heard you say, correct me if I'm wrong, that the $1,221,000 a year that you need to raise to repay, in other words, debt service, was a fixed expense. I think you used that phrase. Did you use that because in your mind the most likely scenario is that we will not have sufficient funds to make it practical to reduce the rate during the upcoming 5 years?
Two different issues.
So, if I understand you correctly, the first year, it absolutely needs to be considered to be fixed. The first year, we don't have any room, and that's because there are a lot of pieces moving here, but that's because the impact of shared revenues doesn't take place the year the tax increase goes into place. It's the year after. So we won't even know until the next year what we could possibly do. So definitely for the first year, we're going to have that 1.221 there regardless. After that, we may have some options. And it's going to be up to the council to sort of determine, what scenarios they want to look at. And I think in my mind, the easiest way to get my head around it is to think of that as fixed for the time being.
Well, I think kind of what you're driving at though, John, we have a fixed debt payment we have to make for 5 years. That's fixed. How we get there could change year to year with respect
Good way to look at it.
With respect to raised revenues and therefore tax rates.
My only point is, I hope it is not intentionally or unintentionally conveyed to the people on the 4th of March that anything other than that is likely for the next 5 years.
And I think that's a good point. I mean, I haven't, those details, those are practical details that I think for transparency are good to talk about, but I think from I think this is, and how we pay for that 1.221 million, we need to think of that in terms of everything being equal. Once we set those rates, there shouldn't be an unspoken, I don't think we should set the expectation or some kind of promise that they definitely will go down at that point. So, but I'm speaking as the manager, not as a council, so.
Chris, I hope this hasn't been covered and I didn't just miss it, but I was wondering, we have the MSD districts. Suppose down the line, some other area of the beach needs to have nourishment done. Then is a new MSD district established for them, or is that continued in the ones that are already existing?
So the council, we can't speak for future councils. What I can say definitively is that you're not going to pay you're not going to pay for nourishment if someone else is. As the MSD. The MSD has to be in the project area. What I would envision, if we were to do something, and this is just me, but if Ken comes back to me after he does some more of the monitoring of the beach and says, my goodness, you better get on it. We need to do a project Where do you live?
Marlin Drive.
In Marlin Drive. We need to do a project on Marlin Drive. Well, what I would think is that we would take the same model that we used here and say, okay, assuming we can get some money from the county for occupancy, like we have for this project, that we would then, for the total capital, for the initial construction of the project, we would follow the same model. We would use the money we get from the county for the project, we would set up MSDs for that, and we would fund it that way. What that would mean is that for renourishment in your area, you're on your own. Through the MSDs, you would pay for, because we would be taking the Dare County occupancy tax and shifting it to another project. That's sort of the model I see, and I think that works logically for one main reason, and that's that if you look at a third of the cost of the project north of the pier, and then you look at over a 4-year period what we would be generating in an MSD, it's pretty much the same. So theoretically, if you all had to pay for renourishment without any additional help from the town or from the occupancy tax, what you're being charged now would be sufficient to do that. The drawback from that, of course, is that it's a large amount of money and it's going to be there as long as you're doing a project. But that's how I see this sort of moving along. If we need to do another project, in the next several years. So.
Any other questions for Chris?
I just have a question about the extending the permitting or what have you. Because my understanding is that you really have to anticipate going into a renourishment period or phase or multiple projects. So it seems like it's in your benefit to have sort of the project be open-ended, if you will, so you don't have to sort of start and re-permit and have all those types of expenses. I mean, I know you would have to have some duplication of expenses because it's probably a new beach with, different needs, but is that not generally the course of these things, is to have sort of an open-ended project?
Sure, we've done it both ways, and sometimes doing all the work up front and knowing how these projects change over time and things get tweaked here and tweaked there, and you end up needing permit modifications to your original plan anyway. Sometimes it's proven out that maybe it's not worth trying to go forward for something like a 30-year permit. You're still going to need to provide them information as you go. You're probably going to need to make some modifications as you go. And one of the other things about this project was because of the sand resources in federal waters, BOEM had mentioned that they can only permit or they can only issue a lease for one event at a time. So to us, it didn't make sense. There seems to be some efficiencies that we can make by modifying maybe the state permit, modifying maybe the core permit, and going through some additional work with BOEM if we need to do that. But the quickest way of doing it was sort of proposing it as a one-shot deal and then come back and making modifications. But Chris is right. I mean, one of the recommendations that was in the feasibility report, and talking to Chris today, I think one of the things that the town's prepared to do is continue to monitor that project. The actual project may be required to be monitored by the permit, but also monitoring the rest of the shoreline on fairly regular intervals, and so that you've got that planning time to lead into it, a year or 2 years. You'll be making projections to say, the fill that we put out there in front of the design has another 3 years worth of life in it. If the erosion trends continue, we need to be thinking about a renourishment in 3 years from now or whatever that time period is. So,
Ken, consider what would be the minimum section size that you would ever consider doing a project?
We did a project. We've done some projects that were a mile long, a mile and a half long. So you probably want to try to keep it around that range at a minimum. knowing there's not a whole lot of safe harbor around here for these dredges to get into if, if weather comes up is certainly a factor. So I would think a mile to a mile and a half might be sort of a minimum that we'd look for.
Any other questions for Chris? Ron?
One more question, Chris.
Hold on.
You mean you can't hear my voice?
That might.
One more question, Chris. Did I hear you correctly in saying that the Corps threw a roadblock in the way when you were talking about access to the beach? And did they come up with, did I hear the word fee?
No, there wasn't a fee. We've had this dialogue going on with the Corps. I think the local guys are fine. I think it's more of it's coming from their Vicksburg office and coming from higher ups, and its general policy implications, and that's what we're running into now. I don't think that the local folks thought that we were going to have any issues with access. And so it was kind of a surprise to them even that we've had some things thrown in front of us. And so, those are things we're going to have to work around. One way or another, we'll figure something out.
Well, if you have to go private for an access, is that going to be an additional cost to this program?
Not really. I mean, again, some of the costs associated, some of the unknown costs at this point for the project, like access, other things that may come up, is frankly what we would use some of that occupancy tax and other shared revenue for that's coming in that has to be used for the project area. The reality is that if we knew this, if we use a portion of the Corps property, there's going to be a cost for us to use it and to, if we knock down a dune, to put the dune back. If we use a private access, there's going to be a cost for us to use that property and to restore it to its preconditions. So we look at that as a wash.
Okay, last call for questions.
As a follow-up to that question about if you do have to use a private road, I guess if there's a lot of trucks that have to go on it, maybe then we're looking at fixing back the road or something like that if there's a lot of heavy trucks going on it.
Yeah, I think what we can expect is that any agreement we would get would be that we would return the area that we're utilizing to its pre-construction state. I think that's only fair, and that's what we would offer. So, and Ken and I had talked about this because, Ken was the bearer of bad news to me. He happened to have a meeting with them about the other side when these issues came up, and of course he called me immediately, and then I called the Corps immediately, and that's why one of the reasons we wanted to show why Ken showed some of the staging. Yes, there will be low boys coming down with, there'll be many trucks that initially on mobilization and demobilization will be coming down a road, but they're not going to be hanging out there. They're not going to be sitting in the cul-de-sac that whole period. Once the stuff is unloaded, it's on the beach, and we deal with it from there. They go back and do their own thing, and when they need to demobilize, they'll come to that area. I think the wear and tear is going to be minimal from a road standpoint. But certainly when you're if there's a high dune that you have to go through, or if we negotiate with someone and we take out their beach access and then we put it back when we're done, there's going to be disruptions there. So
does it have to be either at the northern or southernmost end of the project area, or can it just be?
I think the more desperate we get, we'll take whatever we can.
Make sure Chris knows where you're at.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Very well done.
Thank you.
We'll take 15 minutes. We'll get back at 3:35.